Have you heard of histadelia, or have you heard of people calling themselves histadelics? It's something that's not super known by many people, but I want to talk about it today because it's really important, and it's a condition that I think majority of people that have it don't know they have it. But when they realize they have it, it kind of makes so much more sense. And it really involves histamine, poor methylation, MTHFR, genetic SNPs, and a bunch more things. So I'm going to dive into that in this episode. And I think even if you're not a histadelic or you don't have histadelia, it's still going to be interesting to hear about. And also you're probably still going to learn a thing or two. So definitely listen through. I heard about this condition back like over a decade ago when I started working with a Chinese medicine practitioner, and she said to me, "Oh, you have high histamine, you are a histadelic." And I was like, what is that? And so we started doing a deep dive, and I actually bought this amazing book, which I do not remember the name of for the life of me. I've been spending the last few hours trying to hunt this book down as I no longer have it. It was a borrowed book at the time, and then I ended up buying it and then gave it away. So anyway, that's irrelevant, but I don't have the book anymore, but I had found this book that was so incredible, and I kind of went head first and read so much about it and learned so much on this topic, and it fascinated me. So I want to share it with you guys, and if I ever do come across that book, I'll share it to my social media. All right, so just to give you a little rundown of histadelia and a little summary, it is a condition that's obviously related to having a lot of histamine. And typically, I'll go through this step by step, but just for a summary, histamine is a major neurotransmitter with a very distinct profile. And typically when someone has your high level of histamine, something that is higher than average, higher than it should be, they could be suffering from histadelia. And so it's characterized by insomnia. And you might have some of these and not all, by the way, but insomnia, gastric pain, nausea, persistent headaches, excess saliva production, any other symptoms related to high histamine. There is usually a tendency towards depression, a state of chronic like inner tension. You're usually a tense person. Usually there's some degree of obsessive compulsive like mood with a short temper, and even phobias. And if you're lying in bed at night hoping for sleep, but your brain won't stop, this usually is an indication that you have high histamine or that the histadelia temperament is presenting itself or expressing itself. So we're going to dive in, but histamine, just very quickly, is metabolized through methylation. You need to have proper methylation so that it can collect the histamine and detoxify it. When we do not have sufficient methylation, so if you have the MTHFR genetic SNP, which means you just don't methylate as well as the average person, or you have nutrient deficiencies or, something else that's preventing you from methylating, then histamine stays in the body. And this is where we get this high histamine or a pool of histamine production. When histamine levels increase, the bucket or pool of available methyl donors, which come from B vitamins partly, can be depleted. So normally we will consume sufficient methyl donors from our foods, but when the release of histamine is not matched by sufficient methyl donors, the level of histamine will back up and histadelia symptoms will develop. So let's get into a bit more detail because I think it's a super fun topic. Histadelia is more common in males. It's characterized by elevated blood levels of histamine. It is estimated that 15 to 20% of schizophrenics are probably histadelic. This is also known as an undermethylation problem or being undermethylated. We know that schizophrenia, a big part of this condition, is poor methylation, and people have made leaps and bounds in terms of improvement with this condition over time when they supported their methylation, boosted their B vitamins and things like that. So we know that if you're not methylating, you're holding on to histamine. This is driving not just schizophrenia, but a lot of other conditions. Histadelia is characterized by low levels of serotonin, dopamine, norepinephrine, high whole blood histamine, and elevated absolute basophils. This population has a high incidence of seasonal allergies very commonly, or food sensitivities. There's usually OCD tendencies, perfectionism, high libido, sparse body hair, and several other characteristics. Now, again, you might not have all of these, but you might have some. In severe cases involving psychosis, the dominant symptom is usually delusional thinking rather than hallucinations. These people will tend to speak very little and sometimes may even sit motionless for extended periods of time. Now, again, this isn't a very severe case where it has really progressed. These individuals might appear outwardly calm, but then suffer from extreme internal anxiety. The treatment of histadelia requires great patience because it can take a long time. When I worked on myself, but also with so many clients, sometimes it can take months and months to see significant improvement. Usually 12 months or more, oftentimes to complete. I want to go into some of the signs and symptoms and indicators of histadelia because it's really, again, fascinating. Such an incredible and interesting topic. So when you have high histamine, usually you're going to either feel, very commonly, if you take benzodiazepines, you're going to either have no effect or feel worse with them. Usually you're going to feel better if you take an antihistamine, whether it's natural or medicated. And oftentimes, if you're having histadelia, you're going to have excess mucus production because histamine causes mucus production. So usually you have a lot of excess mucus. So you'll feel better typically taking remedies that dry out the body or decrease the mucus. A lot of times you're going to have a better tolerance for cold, poor tolerance for heat. So you might have a hard time being out in the sun, taking hot showers or baths. You might feel like your condition worsens with heat, but gets better with cold. And if that is you, one of the reasons is because histamine is creating a lot of heat in our body. And so your body's already so high in temperature. When you go and have a hot shower, go out in the sun, go in a sauna, you're elevating that temperature further, which elevates histamine. So a lot of my clients that have high histamine or, topical steroid withdrawal syndrome, things that indicate their histamine is high, seasonal allergies, I keep them out of the heat. And I say go and do things that are more cold temperatures. So colder pools, air conditioning, things like that. Some other things that you might have as a counter indicator is you can have a good tolerance of heat and poor tolerance of cold. So this would be a counter indicator. Now, in terms of the gut and the gastrointestinal system, a lot of times you might have unexplained nausea and poor pain tolerance. So you might feel like, you can't tolerate a lot of pain or you have a lot of pain in general. Now, a lot of times, this is one of the classic symptoms that I think I have seen in myself, but also with every histadelic person. I can pretty confidently say that the majority of histadelic individuals that I've worked with, which is a lot because that's mainly my practice, is people with chronic histamine and inflammation, they've almost all had an excess or abundant salivation or saliva in the mouth. So these people are like, oh, I have so much saliva, I always have to swallow. Or if I talk too much, I'm like spitting. Or, there's always saliva pooling in the corners of my mouth. Anything like that. It's because histamine, again, produces fluid, it produces mucus. So this is where this extra saliva production comes in. But fun fact, this might be an annoying thing to have like excess saliva, but a lot of times people with histadelia or histadelics that have a lot of saliva develop cavities way later than the average person because saliva is actually what prevents cavities when there's that more alkaline or neutral pH in the mouth. It just inhibits a little bit more of that acidity from wearing down the teeth. So saliva is very protective. And a lot of times you can have someone who has high histamine and they have a bunch of other health problems, but even though they maybe had a really poor diet, cavities probably didn't form as early on as majority of people, either formed later or not at all. So fun fact there. And that was definitely the case for me as well. So usually there can be some hyperactivity. That would be like a counter indicator, but sometimes there can be that. Histamine speeds up metabolism, so it can produce a tendency towards hyperactivity. So if you see someone who is super busy, running around, high energy, that can be a histadelic because they have high histamine. And again, that's speeding up the metabolism. Phobias is something that we see as well. So phobias, fear of really anything, is quite common as well among histadelics. I can attest to this because I had major fears. I still do. They've gotten better, but I still do have some big fears, like moving and running water. Way better now. I would say it's almost 100% gone, but I used to have a severe fear of dogs where like I would freeze up and like panic severely if I saw a dog walking towards me, even if he was friendly or anything like that. So it was quite intense. Way better now after working with homeopathy. I had taken things to work on like my miasm and the deeper imbalances that are present from disease. But it's definitely something that's very interesting. And I just wanted to bring that up as well. All right. So another couple things is, and you don't have to have phobias, by the way. This is not something that is always present, but usually is a good indicator of histadelia. Usually these individuals are highly motivated. Sometimes we get frequent colds or flus. And usually those with elevated histamine individuals tend to work compulsively. So you have this like, usually when they start something, they're going to have to finish it. They work quickly. They have that perfectionism because it's this compulsive tendency that they have. So they usually have a hard driving personality. Again, because they tend to work compulsively, they are usually very fast individuals. They can be antisocial. They can have good creativity or imagination. They're often very, highly creative. They also can usually have no difficulty with any sexual related urges. So I know a lot of people who usually have a low vital force, usually individuals that have very low energy, are having very low libido. Whereas histadelics, this histamine drives metabolism. And so they actually have a higher energy oftentimes. And so libido is usually doing just fine. A counter indicator is a weak sexual desire. So just as a counter indicator that can be present. Now, some other things, joint pain, swelling, stiffness is very common among histadelics. Excess perspiration. So these people usually, again, when you have high histamine, you have literally fluid production. So you're going to sweat a lot. You're going to have extra saliva. You're going to have extra mucus. And that's a very common symptom. So that excess perspiration is very common, even if you're not exercising. A lot of times they'll have warm skin. Now, I want to talk about conditions that will suggest histadelia, because I thought this is exciting to talk about it too. So addictions, the first one that I would mention is alcoholism in general. Usually, nutritional treatment for drug and alcohol users will depend on the results of a test for blood histamine levels. So in a series of tests that they've done, individuals with high histamine levels that have gone and worked at reducing histamine by supporting their methylation, by detoxifying the excess histamine, have actually had a really successful time at overcoming their addictions, whether it's alcoholism, smoking, whatever else it might be. So that's so interesting how histamine plays a role and affects our neurotransmitters. Any neurotransmitters that are, when our body's being affected and we're having a different output of the neurotransmitter balance than we should be, it's going to affect our mood, our desires for food, for, different addictions and everything else. So you can be depressed, you can be anxious, you can be moody, you can be anything really when you're having this high histamine, because our neurotransmitter production is being affected. So I thought that was really cool to mention as well. Allergies, rhinitis, hay fever, these are really common to have as a histadelic. Very commonly, you're going to see in blood work high histamine. So you need to confirm this condition when you get blood work, you need to have that proof that there is high histamine, and that will be, you can't be diagnosed, quote unquote, as with histadelia if you don't have high histamine. So a counter indicator would be histopenia, where you have lower histamine. That would usually indicate you don't have this condition. So bipolar disorder or manic depressive, about 35% of these patients have high histamine levels, which I actually had a client. This was years ago. I would say within 2 or 3 years of when I started practicing. There was this younger gentleman I was working with, and his mom actually had reached out to me. He was like maybe 26. His mom reached out to me and said, my son is bipolar. He's been on different medications. He is managing the condition, but it seems like it's getting worse. It's driving us crazy. We need more support holistically. What can we do for food? So she was looking for just like diet support. I had mentioned to her the whole concept of histamine driving bipolar disorder, this manic depressive state. And I asked her, what's his diet like? And he was eating a very high histamine diet. I asked her if he had ever had genetic testing done, and he had. So we actually ran a nutrigenomics profile, which is what I do with a lot of clients, where we look at their genetic SNPs, and he came out with MTHFR genetic SNP and a bunch of other ones as well, which indicates that there would be poor methylation. And he was also taking a multivitamin that had high levels of folic acid, which is a no for anyone with MTHFR. So I said to her, I was like, just some quick things that we can do, and let's just see if it works. Here's like a diet that's low in histamine, that's high in those methyl donors or groups, so he can get that support through food. So those B vitamin foods. And then I'm like, what if he takes a B complex, but we try to not have him do anything that has folic acid, but instead of folate, and let's try to detoxify the excess folic acid. So I kind of gave her this protocol that was very much methylation centered. And within I would say 2.5 months, he lowered his dosage already. Like, it was rapid for him at this point, which when I worked with clients that have had high histamine and these types of conditions, it usually takes at least a year. Within 2.5 months, maybe 3 maximum, he was already lowering his dosage of his medication. And I'm not sure where he's at now, because this has been a few years since we've worked together. But as we worked together over the next couple of years from that point, he got better and better and better. And his mood disorder was the episodes were getting further and further and further apart. It was incredible. So just by doing those couple things. So I just want to mention that as well. Histadelics are often chronically and suicidally depressed. So again, this will be more of an extreme. So you can have a little bit of a low mood. And if that becomes to the point of suicidal depression, that's the histamine elevating, the condition progressing. Most histadelics are prone to obsessions, compulsions, addictions. Like I said earlier, in terms of schizophrenia, histadelia, it is prominent in males. Again, it means there's too much histamine in the blood. It's estimated to affect about, 15 to 20% of patients classified with schizophrenia. And one thing too, symptoms will include hyperactivity, compulsions, obsessions, inattentions, blank mind episodes. This is in regards to schizophrenia, phobias, chronic depression, strong suicidal tendencies. Some physical signs can include little tolerance for pain, rapid metabolism. So usually these individuals might be leaner built, profuse sweating. They might sweat a lot, have seasonal allergies, frequent colds. In terms of the metabolism, we often see headaches, insomnia. These are metabolic related. This is the overstimulation that we see in histadelics because of this overdriving of the metabolism because of high histamine. And so this can cause the headaches, insomnia, things like that. We often see musculoskeletal symptoms like myalgia, that muscle pain. So some risk factors for histadelics would be, again, insufficient methylation. Elevated histamine and or elevated basophils will indicate undermethylation. We usually see a lot of these individuals with some point in their history has been on antihistamine usage. They also will be, a lot of times benefiting from SAMe, which is a supplement that can help with supporting that methylation. They usually will have a history of unexplained nausea at some point, maybe. A lot of times they have slender fingers and toes, or long fingers and toes. And a lot of times if you are seeing someone that has like stubby fingers or toes, they're probably not histadelic. Not always, but most likely they're not. So what are some recommendations? Well, here's a list of them. I'm going to go through this part a little bit quickly, but Methionine is number one. This is a must to get the liver to detoxify. This will help lower your blood levels of histamine because it breaks down histamine. So methionine is one of the most important things, which you will commonly see in a liver detox blend, like liver GI from Pure Encapsulations, for example. You do not want to consume histidine. So any proteins or foods, like combination of foods that have histidine, you want to avoid. You can find a full list on Google of foods that contain histidine. It's typically your protein. You want to be having a histamine restricted diet. So a low histamine diet. You are avoiding citrus, you're avoiding sugars, you're avoiding anything that's going to be, driving histamine. I won't go through the list here because I've made tons of content around low histamine diet. So just Google the full list if you're interested in a histamine restricted diet. A lot of times for these individuals, for a while, doing a vegetarian or very plant dense diet can be helpful. Usually like a lower protein, high complex carb diet might help because it's histidine is more present in animal proteins and it can drive these conditions, especially if you're having things like bone broth or those types of proteins. So usually some fish and stuff is okay. And then you want to do more complex carbs, vegetables, and things like that. You also want to get your copper levels tested. Testing serum or hair copper levels is usually adequate for evaluating copper status. If there's low levels of copper present in the body, which you can see through the hair or through blood tests, then obviously copper toxicity can be ruled out. But it's definitely something to look into. You want to have, again, your histamine and basophil levels tested. You want to test your folic acid levels. Typically, when people don't know about MTHFR, when they're not sure about methylation, they're a lot of times consuming high levels of folic acid, which the body can't break down if you have MTHFR. It can't convert it into folate. So when you're consuming high levels of folic acid, it actually becomes toxic to the body. And you have a whole slew of symptoms from that. So you want to steer clear of folic acid. And a lot of times it's added to like plant-based milks and protein bars and things like that. So just keep an eye out. You want to get your zinc levels tested and your manganese as well. Calcium needs to be tested. Another thing to note is that copper levels may be low to normal in patients with histadelia. So copper is part of the enzyme histaminase, which is involved in the metabolism of histamine. So sometimes I recommend that, you want to be supplementing with copper. And typically, if you're going to do it, you're going to want to do a zinc. I like using the homeopathic preparation, like a gammadine or oligo element of zinc copper blend. However, usually you want to avoid copper if you do have bipolar symptoms presenting. Testing can help determine which way you need to go. So again, get that level tested. All right. One thing that is really important to mention is that methionine and or SAMe usually harm low histamine over methylated individuals, but are amazing for high histamine under methylated people. So I've had some people who have come to me and said, I was taking SAMe and I felt horrible. And immediately I'm like, okay, that means your histamine is too low and you're over methylating. So don't take it. It won't work for you. Now, the reverse is true for histadelics, who are under methylated. These individuals usually thrive on methionine, SAMe, calcium, magnesium, but they'll get much worse if they take folate and B12, which can increase the methyl trapping. Now, sometimes you do need the folate if you're really deficient because you haven't gotten enough through food through the right sources. So again, testing is really important. If you do have low levels of folate, you do want to be supplementing, even if you are histadelic. So keep that in mind as well. It's a very nuanced thing where there's a lot more to it. It's a dance. I wouldn't ever recommend trying to address this condition on your own without a practitioner, but I'm just sharing some of the facts with you, just more for education purposes. Omega-3 fatty acids can be very beneficial. Choline is anti-dopaminergic and often makes undermethylated patients worse. So you might not do well with choline or lecithin. So just heads up with that. Inositol is especially helpful for undermethylated individuals like histadelics, especially, if you have OCD, for example. It can cause negative side effects in those who are overmethylated, however. It is one of the primary second messengers in neurotransmission. So it's surprising that it's not more used. It's so incredible. Inositol is one of my favorite supplements, and it's so useful in reducing anxiety and improving sleep. To enhance sleep for like a 160-pound person, usually you're doing like 650 milligrams, 1 to 3 times a day as needed for sleep. Just side note, but check with your practitioner. So definitely some interesting things. Usually I say, B12 is something, again, you want to be careful with, especially B12 injections. It can make you worse because it does increase the methyl trapping, but again, you might need it sometimes. Folic acid is an absolute no. You definitely want to avoid that at all costs. And that's a pretty quick summary or rundown of this condition. So I thought it was interesting to share. I hope you guys learn something from it. It's one thing that I think, even if you're not sure what to do supplementally, diet can play a huge role. If you are consuming foods that are high in those methyl donor foods, again, Google has a huge list that you can look into and do more research, and consume a low histamine diet. You want to be supporting your methylation, your detoxification channels, and that all can really, really help. Again, methionine is one of the top things that I would be recommending to help support this condition. Sometimes even just like 500 milligrams at bedtime can help bring relief. So just keeping that in mind, but always check with your doctor before supplementing. There are a lot of different treatment protocols through different practitioners that can address this in many different ways. There is a lot of scientific and clinical research available on this if you're interested in learning more and getting more to the root of this. Again, one thing I do want to be clear is beware of excess folic acid and even folate in your diet. There is going to be probably nothing else that can raise your histamine levels quicker and faster than excess dietary folic acid and even too much folate. Sometimes if you are really low in folate, you will need it. Like in the client that I was working with, he had high folic acid, like to the point of toxicity, but in very, very low folate conversion. So he did need folate initially, and it actually helped him a lot. So it just, again, depends on blood work. Get it checked out, but be careful, especially with folic acid. It will definitely raise your histamine. And if a knowledgeable practitioner believes you are leaning to the histadelia side, the first thing they should be recommending is that you immediately stop taking multivitamins containing folic acid. Okay, so just make sure that that's not part of this. I hope that you guys enjoyed this episode. Thank you so much for listening. If you have more questions or want more information on this topic, feel free to reach out to me through my social media. I love talking about different conditions, especially when it comes to histamine and inflammation, because it's what I live, eat, sleep, and breathe in terms of my practice. So I thought I would just share some of this information with you because it's such an interesting topic. And even if you don't feel you're histadelic, even just understanding like the importance of methylation and having too much folic acid and things like that is still so powerful and so helpful. So I hope you guys enjoyed. Thanks for listening, and I will talk to you in the next episode. Bye.